Hey, everybody, and welcome back to OTT Executive Podcast, where we interview leaders in the industry and get to know a little bit about them and a little bit from them. So today we're joined by Scott Olechowski, who's the co-founder and chief product officer for Plex. Welcome, Scott.
Hey Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing awesome. I'm glad we got a chance to do this podcast. I know we've been talking about some of the research that we're working on, and you provided insights there. But this is really intended to kind of share a little bit about your background and kind of what you're doing, and maybe swim upstream, talk about some of the industry trends and that kind of thing. But before we do that, let's start with you and your career background. Can you share kind of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. My story starts, I'm old. So my story starts way back in like 1978, 1979, when my dad brought home the first Apple II computer. And, he worked for the company that actually invented the modem, right?
You're
So,
kidding me.
um,
That's
so I've been
amazing.
Yeah, so I've been kind of, I kind of grew up a little bit of a nerd, and really enjoyed the process of seeing the technology come together. He brought it home before they even had the floppy disk drive. You had to plug my little Fisher Price tape deck in and put cassettes in and read it into the computer to play games and all that kind of stuff. But I was always just, really kind of fascinated with tech and, personal tech in particular. As I grew up playing in a band. I played guitar, so I was like, I had the music thing and I had the media thing and the tech thing all kind of like wrapped up into,
Same
you
side
know,
of the brain, I think, right? The tech and the music side of things sometimes, yeah.
yeah, I think so too. And I just, really enjoyed that intersection of entertainment and media and tech. And I didn't know what I would be doing in the future, but it always felt kind of right that would be something in there. I grew up outside of Chicago and went to school at DePaul University there. And I decided kind of early, having grown up with the computers and had been online when we were doing BBSs. This is well before the internet, dialing into other people's homes and, talking on their computers and leaving messages, and someone else would dial in later and respond. And, started off with that when I went to college. That was like never like there was an internet, right? It was before the web, but it was like the internet. I was just like, okay, you can kind of feel where this is going. It was a really
Hmm.
fun time. But I also knew enough about myself that I wasn't going to be a programmer, right? I'm more of a hack on that front, and I just can't sit still long enough to actually, do that kind of thing. So I decided, I'm probably going to be better off on the business side of things. So I actually went to school for marketing and management, and but then, kind of beer money was by, helping people build databases for their, small businesses and things like that. So I got started, I was still kind of, working on tech, but more from a business angle. Did some startup stuff and ended up in Silicon Valley for many years, and did some enterprise software stuff and ended up with a company that got acquired and then acquired again into Cisco systems. And then learned a lot, but on the side kind of decided that I needed something that was going to keep me from going insane. And Plex actually started as a hobby back in like 2007, 2008.
No way. That is so interesting. All right, that's a great background. I love it. Very succinct too. Congratulations on that one.
That's unlike
Um,
me.
so so tell me about that. So, a lot of startups or a lot of good ideas start with, hey, this is cool for me, something I want to do, and then you understand the commercial value and then kind of grows from there. What was the genesis of Plex?
Okay, so I'll give you hopefully a quick little rundown of how this came to be. So, my wife and I now have five children, and had our first in 1999, and that was right around the time that Nikon came out with their Coolpix, that were one of the original consumer digital cameras. And so we had lots of photos, lots of digital photos, and small little postage stamp size videos, and all that at the time. This is obviously way before the iPhone. But I also had ripped our entire CD collection and started recording like over the air broadcasts with my TiVo and, other things. And as the kids started growing up, they would have DVDs and they would use them as weapons and make sandwiches out of them. And I couldn't afford to keep buying the same DVDs over and over again. So I started ripping those. So I had this really, extensive digital media collection,
Hmm.
and I could watch it up in my office on my computer, but I couldn't really connect it to my stereo or my, TV where I wanted it. So I
Hmm.
started hacking on stupid stuff. I remember I was connecting like these rack mount servers behind the TV because they would fit, and I would have it hooked up to the TV, and then you'd have like a little RF keyboard with a trackball on it, and you were using Windows Explorer to bring up, DCN 1976.jpg and whatever, and I'd be sitting on the couch trying to navigate File Explorer, Windows Explorer on the TV, and my wife was like, "No."
You mean so you're trying to do like a slideshow on the TV
Yeah, like a
and grab your
slideshow or
media from
just,
the
watch
okay.
a movie, trying to launch it there. And it was just like, it was not a great experience. And
Yeah.
that's what kind of set me on the quest was like, all right, I have this, got all this stuff. The kids, the family would enjoy this, but no one can use it. And it's not so
Mm-hmm.
then I really did start trying to figure out, okay, what is the best way to get my media onto these devices?
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, I hooked up with found this thing called XBMC, Xbox Media Center, which is people would hack their original Xbox. There was a game that you could glitch at a certain moment, and you could then, root it and be able to install your own software. And these guys had made this open source, incredible system that ran on the Xbox, but they didn't make that Xbox anymore. I had to buy mine off of Craigslist. I met some guy in like a Office Depot parking lot and went, trunk to trunk and paid him money for it. And and it worked great. It was really awesome. It was beautiful. It worked. But as soon as you had a second TV, then you ran into a problem. Either A, you couldn't get another one of these devices, and B, they didn't really talk to each other and
Mm-hmm.
all that. So right around that same time, the Apple had their Mac Mini, like kind of early revisions of the Mac Mini, and we decided, man, it would be awesome if we could get this running on there. So we started looking around, and I met my co-founder online, working on it. He basically at the same time was trying to solve the same problem, and he's an actual developer. And together we just teamed up and, basically spawned Plex out of this kind of mutual desire to create a centralized media server that could gather all of your media and get it out to all your devices. And around that time, the iPhone was out, right? And
Yeah.
the Roku was doing Netflix, and you were starting to see this kind of app explosion
Mm-hmm.
happening out there, and all these different things and silos of media being created. And,
Mm-hmm.
at first, again, it was a hobby, but um, I don't know, about 2009, 2010, LG
Mm-hmm.
Electronics, someone from Seoul, Korea reached out and said, "Hey, we think you guys might be part of the future of television. Would you come to Korea and talk to our CTO and, 100 of his people and talk about what you guys are doing?" And by the end of that day, they decided they wanted to invest. They wanted to get it running on their new smart TV coming out in a couple months and demo it at CES, and they wanted to invest in the company. And that's
That
what we had
quickly.
and
You
they
went from
we had to
hobby
decide. We
to
hadn't even
real.
formed a yeah, that's true. And we had to decide like, are we going to form a company? Because we
Yeah.
hadn't even done that yet. Again, it was still a hobby, fun
Wow.
time. And then we had to kind of sit down and say, okay, is there a business here? What does that business look like? What problem are we really going to solve?
Yeah.
And I have decks from 2010, 2011 that talks through, yeah, we're going to solve this personal media problem, but there's a broader problem here. There's a problem
Mm-hmm.
around, all these silos being built up and all these different
Mm-hmm.
hardware platforms that are going to be doing it. And something needs to be at the center of this, right? And we kind of decided that we could be part of that layer of helping people discover content and access content and do it across all these devices as a web, mobile, TV operating system, connected TV solution. So a lot of the stuff we're doing today is really kind of was, if you look at the roadmap from back then and where we are now, we're finally actually kind of got a lot of the pieces together that we envisioned early on. It's just taken us a couple of years to get here.
That what a great story. I mean, that could be like a Harvard business case study. I mean, it's just like the whole evolution that you just kind of took us through. You identified a problem, it was sort of personal, and then very quickly it became commercialized because you kind of and that's I think that's where a lot of innovation comes from, right? It's kind of self-serving at first, and then you're like, wow, we're on a trend here. There's a real problem that we're solving.
Yeah, there's other
Um,
people share this need. Yeah.
and then getting the investment and then commercializing it. That's all 2007, that's when I started trying to research and I was coming out of cable, telecom, wireless and actually competing with Cisco at one company. When this thing, we called it triple play at one point and then
Yep.
IPTV, internet TV, OTT. I actually wrote one of the original reports, kind of coining. I don't get credit for coining the phrase, but definitely helping to promote it. And then things just really took off into the streaming world. So thank you for that. That's a great background on your career and also Plex. How did things evolve from there? Like, take us to the current, day in Plex world.
Okay. So yeah, the way I kind of mentally map out the product is I break it into kind of three categories, three pillars. The first is the content pillar, which people's personal media is one of those things, and be able to access video files that you might have on your network or whatever, run this on your own hardware and in your home, and then be able to access it on any device, right, inside the home, outside the home. That included music and stuff as well. We still have a music product that we call Plex Amp that is pretty innovative and great if you have your own personal music collection. And then we added the ability to plug into some sort of over-the-air, tuner box like an HD home run or something like that,
Hmm.
and added an EPG and a DVR, and you can then, record all of this over the air, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox content, etc. And in your home and be able to sling it out anywhere and all that. And then in 2019, that was around the time we decided, okay, now we need to, like, we've got this piece like really solid. We're on all of
And
these.
what category would you call that? It's a home media server kind of.
Yeah, we
Okay,
call it a personal media server,
personal
right?
media server.
We
Okay,
call it personal media because it's content that people have, whether it's their home videos or stuff that they've recorded or
yep.
whatever it happens to be. That's the heart of that is your personal media, right? We make it look nice. We can throw any kind of file format at it, and we'll just make it work everywhere on all these different platforms and devices.
Yep.
And then to grow the company, and that's it's a fairly niche solution, right? There's a bunch of
Hmm.
people who love it and use it all the time, but it's not for everyone. My mom
Hmm.
is not setting up a media server in her home
Right.
typically.
Mhm.
But then so that's when we decided, okay, now it's time to branch out. We want to expand, what you can do with Plex, and we have this great foundation. Metadata is at the heart of what we do. We have lots of different metadata relationships and can do things that others can't do there. So then we went to Hollywood and started doing deals with a bunch of distributors and studios and launched our AVOD solution in
Hmm.
late 2019. And then COVID hit, which actually, fortunately was good for that business, right? A lot of people at
Yep.
home, a lot more streaming happening, and having a free service with great content was a real opportunity. We saw a lot of growth through that, and we added Fast in 2020, I believe.
Okay.
Now we have one of the largest Fast lineups, and we do this globally. This is not just in the U.S. This is in almost every country in the world. We have
Hmm.
content available. The catalog's different in every country, right? We have stuff
Hmm.
that maybe only in a certain geo and stuff that's worldwide, et cetera. So we manage all of that on behalf of Plex and the users and our partners, and that's all ad free, ad supported free content that people can access, and we've got great business there. And then a couple of years ago, we launched TVOD, so you can rent and even buy movies that just came out of the theater, and you can do that in
Hmm.
the US and Canada, I believe now, and we may add some more countries over time for that solution. And that's kind of where we are on the content side. We're continuing to always improve the AVOD catalog. The fast
Hmm.
stuff is, constantly improving all over the place, and we see a lot of growth in those areas. But then the second big bucket pillar of the business, we call it Discover, right? So you can go to watch.plex.tv, you can search for any movie or TV show ever made, and we'll
Hmm.
have all the metadata there for it. But we'll also have links to the services where you can watch that content, right?
Like
Because
deep
everything's
links.
been kind of scattered to the wind on all
Hmm.
these different services. How
Right.
do you find this stuff? So we're providing a pretty valuable service to
Hmm.
people, be able to find anything and see who's in it and all that kind of stuff that you
So
might
even
want.
outside of the Plex platform, it sort of
Absolutely. Yep.
okay.
So we'll deep link you right into
Hmm.
that show on, Disney or Max or, Netflix or whatever it happens to be, and get you right to it. And
Can you
with that,
monetize that, or is that just like a service to your community?
there's kind of a market out there where these services, if the user doesn't have the service and they turn it on, we'll get an affiliate fee. So there
Okay.
is revenue there, and we'll do some stuff to help promote, those things for
Hmm.
folks as well as part of our premium ad business. So, and then we have a watch listing capability, right? So you can add any of these shows to your watch list. And I think today we've hit about 45 million people have created a watch list on Plex, right? So you get this
Wow.
universal search, universal where to watch, and a universal watch list. And with that, I can one click recommend something to you. You can one click add it to your watch list, and it just becomes a really, valuable
Like a
utility.
Spotify kind of vibe.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and which is challenging to do on an individual service because they've only got, their slice of the content universe.
Mhm.
And now you got something that can do that across everything and help you find it as things move around in different windows, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, and then the third pillar is what we call community, right? So there's this whole
Mhm.
social layer we've been adding to Plex, and frankly, is probably the most interesting, thing that we're doing over time here, I believe, because the ability to connect with each other on Plex. We can do it privately, so friends and family that you can
Mhm.
choose to share all your activity with one another. So anything you watch list, anything you rate, any review you write, any time you recommend something to somebody, all that can be kind of shared. And what that leads
Mhm.
to, once you hit a little critical mass of people you know and trust, the first place I go to figure out what to watch is what's trending with my friends, right? Because these are,
Mhm.
again, these are people I know. These are the people that were telling me stuff at dinner parties or, whatever, hanging out. Hey, you got to check this out. Hey, you're going to love this. And, you kind of know each other's
So that's
tastes and
happening anyhow, but you're automating it, right? Within the app. Like you're
integrating it, automating it.
yep.
Yep.
Okay.
So, and that, that's obviously leading to, engagement that, we
Mhm.
wouldn't have otherwise, but it's also, again, it's solving a problem for people on discovery, right? We think, discovery is just such a big opportunity and big
Mhm.
challenge. When you look at the numbers, the amount of time people spend just trying to figure out what to watch on a regular
Mhm.
basis is kind of insane. It's becoming more work than it is pleasure sometimes for folks.
Yeah, no kidding. It's the same problem
Bizarrely,
going
this
back to Blockbuster and just spending an hour trying to find a title. You're just doing that at home now. It's crazy.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, and then as that community stuff grows, we've been adding more and more public stuff now, so people can write reviews and publish them. And as those reviews, get activity and get bubbled up, they'll start showing up on all the different platforms for even for people you don't know. But you
Mhm.
could also have a profile page on Plex, and I could follow you, right? You now have the ability to create custom lists, and I could follow your lists. So the ability to start following each other and following things you're interested in, and people you're interested in, and shows and writers and directors that you're interested in, that's all either here or coming soon.
Mhm.
And you can just imagine more and more of this public community, public discussion stuff that's coming, being
Yeah.
integrated into the platform. People are looking for communities that are focused, right? And the outlet for that today is Facebook groups or Facebook and Reddit and things like that. And what we just believe at our in our heart and soul is that this needs to be more integrated into the entertainment experience, right? That
Mhm.
it can be integrated into your TV apps and your mobile apps and your web apps and
Mhm.
that stuff. It doesn't have to be a separate site that wasn't kind of
Mhm.
designed for this stuff. We have the metadata, we understand this, we can point you to where to watch it. All that stuff is integrated.
Well, you're really covering a lot, Scott. I mean, it's very holistic, and I love kind of the evolution too from AVOD and fast to TVOD, and then the sort of service, right, for your community, the content discovery. That's a big pain point, and a lot of people still aren't doing that right, and they're thinking very walled garden. They're thinking very, point to multi-point, push it out there, and you're thinking more direction, bi-directional, where the user, the viewer is part of the community. They can share their watch list. I mean, I would love to automate that because I'm always, we're always like, okay, what's the next, docu series we want to watch or whatever, and it's kind of word of mouth type of thing, and then you forget, and you're like, okay. But if you were following certain people and you really liked their recommendations, then that would just become more natural. Let's talk a little bit more about that community part because I see that is a real differentiator in terms of engagement. And why are not more streaming apps embracing community? Or is that something that's going to just happen on its own?
I think it's a great question. I think you could argue that what YouTube does in some cases there's some community when you have creators that have, a deep following and lots of folks, and they're just able to kind of somehow kind of, in the threaded comments, be able to kind of discuss stuff with each other. I think YouTube is probably the most social of the
Mhm.
streaming, stuff out there. Clearly, other folks have kind of dabbled in it. I think Netflix had some social stuff. I think it's tough to do it when it's just one content silo, right? I think it's tough if, you have Netflix and I have Disney Plus and now we want to talk about something and we don't even have it. Like you need something that's a little bit more independent in the middle of this that is not tied to a hardware platform. It's not Roku only or Amazon Fire only or Samsung only, and it's not Netflix only or Disney only or
Mhm.
Max only or whatever. I think that's where there's been challenges, right? Because again, as soon as you cross one of those boundaries and it doesn't work, it's going to be frustrating. It's not going to
Yeah.
be helpful, right? So I think that's part of it. And I think, with other, there's a lot of, as we, start to peel back this onion, there's lots of issues, right? Creating a site like Reddit, sounds easy on the surface. Oh, just post stuff, right? There's lots of moderation related issues and
Yes.
legal issues and other stuff that you want to make sure you're ahead of before you, unleash the hounds on these things. And we've been really
Mhm.
thoughtful
Mhm.
about that because, we want to make sure this is a good, safe, fun place for
Yeah.
people because it is entertainment driven, right? We don't want this to
Mhm.
become a place where people are spewing hate speech or, getting
Right.
nasty with one another. So we're trying to be intentional about that as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's got to be
yeah,
structured. It can't just be a playground where, everybody's running around. Like it's got to be got to have some
exactly.
rules and it's got yeah. So that
And,
makes a
and
lot of
and then the
sense.
question is, if you did all that work and it was just for your content, would it really be successful? I mean, so I don't know. I
Mm.
I think it's possible. I think I think you'll see more and more social stuff come into more and more of these platforms, but these platforms have lots of other issues that they're working to solve as well. And I mean,
Hmm.
discovery is still, I think, just a huge issue in and of itself. And
Hmm.
I think that the way we're viewing these is that they're totally complementary, right? Like
Yep.
at some point I may not be in like posting stuff in the community, but I might be reading that. But I also know that this is feeding, my personal friends and all that is feeding the recommendations Plex is going to give me, right? So the goal
Hmm.
here is to get the signal so that we can provide you the best personalized recommendations. And
Hmm.
community is just kind of like a natural offshoot of that, right? People
Of
want to discuss
course.
this stuff, they want to talk about this stuff, and they want to learn and they want to engage. And we think there's opportunities for these content creators to engage in these discussions as well. Like I would
Hmm.
love to have the Game of Thrones showrunners, providing some behind the scenes stuff and give them a safe place to do that.
Well, that was my next question actually is how has this changed your definition of content? I mean, there's a lot of overlap between community concepts and creator economy concepts where suddenly now you have people providing content that you're not producing yourself, right? Or licensing. How do you weave that in? Is that how do you how do you moderate it, curate it? Like talk about that a little bit. Is that part of your growth
That's
strategy?
part of I don't think we're there yet, but that
Okay.
is absolutely where we want to go. I mean,
Okay.
again, if it's, kind of a creative additive to the experience. Like to me, I think a lot of us that have been working on Plex, and I think a lot of the people that use Plex, the experience is kind of the heart of it, right? Like you can find lots of different places to watch content, but it's really about that. Like,
Hmm.
there's an emotional kind of piece of how it all fits together and how it comes together. And I think we can create a great experience with all this new content, right? The content about the content is to me sometimes just as valuable as the content itself if it's done well. And I think the secret to that is letting the community, discover and bubble up the great stuff so that, if I'm a little bit more of a voyeur, I'm getting the best of the best. But if I'm like deep in the weeds, I can help discover that really great additive
Hmm.
content to this thing. So to me, it's all a spectrum. Like some folks are going to come in, they're just going to watch the movie, they're going to leave. Other
Hmm.
folks are going to come in and they're going to like, we're going to know everything you've ever watched, everything you've ever rated. We're going to know all your friends and what those signals are. And we're going to be able to, provide those recommendations to you. And then there's another level where people are going to be so engaged in that community around that universe that they're going to be like almost helping, you know, contribute to the lore of that
Yeah.
universe and that fandom. Right. So to me, the content about the content is, going to be just as valuable over time.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned fandom, which is sort of an extension of the creator economy and these community concepts. Obviously, the benefit to you is better engagement, or, lower churn and everything. How about monetization? Have you stumbled over other ways to monetize this community? Of course, you don't want to be completely, sort of what's the right word? But you know what I'm saying? Like you want to be authentic. You don't want to turn people off, but if you've got a community around, let's say, Western cowboy and Westerns, whatever, maybe you're selling cowboy boots. Like, do you
Yeah.
see those
I
kind of
think there's going to be a
partnerships in the?
lot. I think there's going to be a lot of that.
Okay.
Again, the more endemic that advertising can be, the more it feels like it's almost an extension of the experience.
Right.
Better. It's going to take
Yeah.
us a while to scale to get there, but
Hmm.
that like every day, that's the kind of stuff we're thinking about, right? Like there's a huge, just go to eBay. There's a huge market for all the merchandise related to these
Hmm.
movies and shows and stuff like that, signed posters and stuff from the
Hmm.
set and things like that. I think there's a market just for that stuff that should
Yeah.
be part of this experience in a way that's not today, right? It's completely disconnected, and I don't think it has to be that way. So I do think there's that. There's also, listen, if someone's got a new movie coming out in theaters, they need to quickly find an audience, right? And we can help them do that. So there's definitely ways that we can monetize this. That I think is helpful for the folks that are enjoying the platform and for the
Hmm.
folks trying to reach those people, right? And that I think will, in a lot of cases, one of our most popular hubs on the whole platform are trailers, right? And trailers are
Hmm.
essentially ads for movies, but
Yeah.
people crave them, right? People love them. And
Hmm.
having that little add to watch list button show up on the trailer on Plex is a powerful motion, right? For the people, promoting the movie, but also for that user who's going to be interested in that movie. To me, this is a marketplace where there's people who really love content and want to find the best stuff for them, and for content producers who are looking for those people. So if we can, leverage that more and more, I think we'll be successful with that
How
for
about UGC? I know a lot of folks are talking about, fan art and, fan provided, trailers, for instance, right? They kind of like come up with movie concepts. Is that something you'd be open to, hosting on the platform?
assuming everything's, above board and legal and there's no, copyright issues and things like that, I would think it would be awesome to have, people expressing themselves that way on the
Yeah.
platform, because it's that community that loves this content. They're going to love that fan, fiction type of stuff as well. I think it would
Yeah.
be, my hope is that over the next couple of years, it really becomes a home for all sorts of creative outlets
Because
like
now you're
that.
mixing into the social media world, right? Because that's already happening there. So I can't let you go until we talk about the burning issue of the last couple of years, which is AI and how it might be shaping the industry, maybe ways that Plex is using it today. How do you see the AI trend and how is it going to change the media and entertainment industry in your view?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say there's probably three or four vectors that we're tracking ourselves, right? Well, first is building the tech, using AI to help us build stuff. So,
Yep.
we're definitely coming up that curve, and more of what we're delivering is being, assisted or if not built by AI. And we're so hungry to get features out, anything we can do to accelerate it and,
Hmm.
take out some of the drudgery or grunt work of building a tech platform that scales to, tens and tens and tens of millions of people. That's awesome, right? It'll help us to deliver better stuff, but, sooner for less, and that's great. So I think that's going to disrupt things in a good way. I mean, obviously there's always an impact on, the shape of what an org looks like, but
Hmm.
I'll tell you this, like our appetite is insatiable. We need the people to hold these tools. It's not like we're just like, oh, we need less people and we're not, whatever.
Right.
That's not our attitude. Our attitude, we're a pretty lean, mean machine to begin with, but
Hmm.
we're like, okay, now we might be able to start to scratch at this appetite. The appetite's not is only going
Well,
to
well,
get
things that you were daunted to even try, you can now do. My wife works in HR, and she says, "Look, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to somebody else that's using AI." And
exactly. I
and
agree
and and so
wholeheartedly.
that's you have to have that sort of I don't know. Anyhow, but
I think it's the right orientation. The second is, we're using it to understand the content better because again, the sheer amount of content that's been produced, the
Mhm.
mediaverse that we're looking at is so big, and the metadata coverage for that is, sometimes very shallow, right? Because it's just not as popular stuff. Um, or, we've seen metadata trends kind of change over time. So
Mhm.
what people emphasized in the 80s might be different from, the, today's metadata. So we've got a partner called Vion Labs that we use, that we look at every AVOD asset we have. We run it through their system. They give us, a list of genres and micro genres and keywords and moods, and they can do that, on
Amazing.
a timestamp basis. And it gives us consistent metadata across our entire catalog in a way
Mhm.
that we just can't get from, the other metadata sources. So
Mhm.
that's a good example of us like really practically using AI to surface stuff that we could not, reliably surface before. So that's a really, for us, a valuable, interesting use case, and it's driven a bunch of usage on the platform because of stuff that would have been buried, as now we're finding those needles in the haystack for
Mhm.
folks. So that's good. Um, And then I think, obviously from running the business, there's a whole bunch of areas where we're, leveraging AI now to help us, the drudgery of creating a presentation and, pulling stuff
Mhm.
together, all these things for a board meeting and this and that. We're starting to streamline a lot of these business
Mhm.
processes that allows us to focus on the things that matter to the
Mm.
business more than just, that kind of, you know, drudge,
That's
type
a
of
good
work.
point because you're taking care of some of the business fundamentals that allow you to focus on the more strategic things that are the more customer facing, value added things potentially for your business.
Yeah, I may have mentioned how old I am before. So remember, I was born before the word processor. Now I got to see the word processor. I was like, that's a game changer, right? Even for me, I used to have
Yes.
to type my papers on a typewriter and that sucked. So now I've got, I've seen that. I lived email, I lived mobile, I lived, internet, all this stuff. And to me, this is a big one. And maybe it's a bigger step function, but it's that same sort of thing is that it allows people to focus on things that are more strategic, like you said.
Yes.
And that's the opportunity, right? And I feel like I've lived it enough times where to me this is just like it's as exciting as any. And I think just like with any of this tech, there's going to be downsides, and we're going to have to manage those as a world, as a people.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. I mean, I wrote my senior thesis in college on an Apple, I don't know what model it was, whatever, and it ate my floppy drive, right? And I remember the little bomb that would show up on the screen,
Yes,
which means you're screwed
you're
basically.
opposed.
And 35 pages in, and I had to start all over again with my. It was such a nightmare. My professor was very nice. He actually let me submit it after graduation because it took me that
Wow.
much long. So there's always a downside to technology and stuff. You know, some people think like AI is going to come and get us, and at some point, but so
Well, it
there.
doesn't help when some of the people building the AI are saying that stuff, but yeah.
I know it doesn't really help the cause, but in the short term, we're safe, right? And I think it's going to really explode. It's going to really prompt a lot of creative juices in people because again, the drudgery, as you said, is going to be easier and things they wouldn't even think to tackle, they're going to take on now. So that's fantastic. Well, Scott, we're pretty much out of time. One of the things we love to do on this podcast is sort of personalize some of the luminaries in the industry, get to know you a little bit. Is there any hobby or interest that you can share with our audience?
uh, I have lots of little hobbies, lots of little things, but probably the core one, my wife and I love to travel, right?
Okay.
So I would say, if I have the free time and I can afford it, even if it's not fancy, we'll go and try to explore some part of the world that we haven't seen. And, we just did a really amazing trip up to the, northern part of Norway to go see the Northern Lights and
Oh,
do
nice.
that
Although
whole
the
thing.
Northern Lights seem to be around here these days. We had them
I
in
know that's true. They're
Boston
coming
last year.
down. Yeah. But that was pretty incredible. So if there's ever a chance for us to sneak away and go do something like that, we will take the opportunity. And it's we Plex is a completely remote company, so we don't have an office or anything. We're all spread out. So I get antsy sitting in front of a computer. Remember, I said I didn't want to be a developer because I couldn't sit in front of a computer too long. So
That's your
travel
superpower.
is my escape.
What's the most exotic place that you visited?
Because we're remote, we take the company to we do a trip once a year. We go somewhere. So we just took the whole company to Vietnam, and that was beautiful and amazing. So I don't know if that's the most exotic place I've
That's
ever
pretty
been. It
exotic for
was it
most
was
people.
pretty
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, we've done
That is
some
awesome.
amazing spots.
It's on my bucket list. I've only been to Japan, but I've definitely want to
Oh,
explore
Japan is amazing too.
more of Asia. Yeah. Anyhow, listen, we're out of time, Scott. I really appreciate this time with you. Thank you so much for your insights. It seems like every year when this industry, this crazy sort of let's call it the streaming industry, sort of gets settled, there's something else, some other innovation where you feel like you're 6 months behind, and it injects a new sense of energy into it. And I think that's where we are right now in terms
I
of
agree.
this new energy and innovation cycle, and it's exciting. So I think it's going to be a good year.
Amen. I could not agree more.
Well, congrats on all your success. Thank you for sharing your story once again. This is Brian Mahoney, the CEO of Trend of Research and the president of the OTT executive community. We've been joined by Scott Olechowski, the co-founder and chief product officer for Plex. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Brian. Take it easy.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Signing off.